Vladimir Putin is allegedly ready to stop shelling deep into Ukraine during the elections, but he demands that the mythical 10 million Ukrainians in Russia vote on Russian territory. Putin threatens Europe with a big war, but admits the collapse of the Russian economy. Putin admits Russia's economic growth has slowed sharply, but still urges Russians to take pride in the barbaric seizure of Ukrainian cities. But the main idea that was voiced during Vladimir Putin's direct line was that Putin said he is itching to continue the war against Ukraine, which, according to him, allegedly does not show readiness for peace. Putin claims Russia is ready for peace immediately, but only on its terms. And then he claims that in Alaska in August, Russia already made some kind of super-duper concessions. But Putin also states that he feels no responsibility or remorse for the thousands of people killed, since supposedly it was not Russia that started this war. Well, apparently, so that there will be more cannon fodder in the future. Putin urged Russians to marry off girls before they reach adulthood so that they can have more children. And in the end, he said that cutting off the internet is actually good for Russians because look, they've captured Kupiansk again. So in this episode, we'll go over the main takeaways from Vladimir Putin's live Q&A. I'm Alexei Pechiy, let's review this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like and leave any detailed comment under this episode. Also subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, the most talked about news from Vladimir Putin's live Q&A is this photo, where a Russian citizen asks Putin via short message service why he is lying so blatantly about the capture of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, if the armed forces of Ukraine are punishing Russians there. Just kidding, of course. The main news is that Putin has started actively manipulating the topic of elections in Ukraine, thus playing into Donald Trump's hands. It's crucial Ukraine avoids this trap. The thing is, Putin stated that Russia is ready to consider the possibility of stopping strikes on Ukraine on the day of the presidential elections in the country. Quote, maybe what I'm about to say will sound unexpected. We are ready to consider ensuring security during the elections in Ukraine, at least to refrain from strikes deep into the territory on the day of voting. At the same time, Putin added that there remains a question which Russia considers fundamental. He stated that millions of Ukrainian citizens live on the territory of the Russian Federation, and quote, from 5 to 10 million of them have the right to vote. In the event that elections are held in Ukraine, in Putin's opinion, Moscow has the right to demand that the organizers ensure the possibility for Ukrainian citizens residing in Russia to vote on Russian territory. Let me stop right here. Well, first of all, no Russian has the right to demand anything from Ukraine, and secondly, what's with this range of 5 to 10 million Ukrainians in Russia? Clearly there aren't 5 to 10 million Ukrainian citizens in Russia, and here I'll refer to Russia's own official data. According to the 2021 census, there were 884,000 Ukrainians living in Russia, so not even a million. Also, after the Russian invasion, almost 2 million Ukrainians left for or were taken to the Russian Federation, including 19,500 deported children. But it's very difficult to calculate the real number, because many people, let's be honest, left through the Russian Federation in transit, then went further to Georgia or Kazakhstan or Europe, through Estonia and Saint, the Baltic countries, and so on. Many were forcibly Russified. Well, even with the roughest estimate, there aren't even 3 million actual Ukrainians with Ukrainian passports. Also, Putin obviously means Ukrainians living in the occupied territories of Ukraine, who by any means possible keep their Ukrainian passports. So if they want to, well, forging 5 or 10 million ballots won't be difficult for them at all. But that would be a complete legal nonsense. Just like those pseudo-referendums in the territories that Putin hasn't even captured yet. In 2022, they held referendums to recognize Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk and Luhansk as supposedly Russian. Most of the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions weren't under occupation at all. Obviously, all those 10 million ballots they made up there will be for some candidate who, of course, is beneficial to Russia. And I wouldn't be surprised if Putin even demands to register his own presidential candidate in Ukraine. This is all nonsense, but the main issue is how much Donald Trump will see this as a good idea. Trump might say, for example, that since Putin promises not to shell cities on election day, there's no reason not to hold the elections. I'm not even mentioning that no one can run a proper election campaign. Well, in fact, this is just another manipulation by Putin to complicate holding elections in Ukraine and thus show Trump, like, look, it's Zelensky and Ukraine as a whole who don't want to hold elections. And everything like that. Let me remind you that on December 9, United States President Donald Trump stated that Ukraine is using the war as an excuse to postpone elections and called on Kyiv to confirm its democratic course. The next day, Volodymyr Zelensky said he was ready to hold elections if two conditions were met: security from Russian attacks and changes to legitimize wartime voting. Zelensky said Western partners' help is needed to solve the first issue. And if security is ensured, Ukraine will be ready for elections within 60 to 90 days. But security must be maintained not just for one day, but for a long period. Only on voting day, not as Putin claims. Meanwhile, Putin cynically claimed Russia isn't responsible for deaths during the fighting in Ukraine. Quote, "We do not consider ourselves responsible for the deaths of people because we did not start this war. This war was started after a coup d'etat in Ukraine, an unconstitutional armed coup in 2014. And then Putin went on again with his usual nonsense about how it was Kyiv that attacked Donbass. Where were you for 8 years? Supposedly, Russia long refused to recognize the independence and sovereignty of the so-called pseudo-Quasi-Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic. And at the same time, Moscow was pushing for their recognition by Kyiv within the framework of the Minsk agreements. But after Putin said we were betrayed, Russia was forced, literally forced, to use armed forces to attack Ukraine and end the war. Well, I don't know, only Russians could believe this nonsense. Later, Putin told a fairy tale about how, during negotiations with Trump in Alaska, Russia made some super concessions, but the Europeans ruined everything. Putin also stated that Russia is ready to make peace even tomorrow, but can't, because supposedly there is no one in Ukraine to make peace with. That's why there are elections first, then he'll come up with something else, so you can make excuses for years. It's a shame Trump doesn't get this. Well, Putin the peacemaker didn't last long here either, and his true Russian nature started to show. Putin openly stated that, quote, he's itching to continue the war against Ukraine, which, according to Putin, is not showing readiness for peace, end quote. When we saw what they were doing to the civilian population, we just felt an itch to act. We are ready to go further and finish off this scum. Well, here Putin, instead of the boy in underwear story, the Ukrainians will get the point. He told a new story about grandmothers who were shot, whom he personally saw, how Ukrainian Nazis were shooting at grandmothers. And after that, he stated that Ukraine does not want peace. Quote, so far, we really do not see such readiness from Ukraine. But still, we do see, feel, and know about certain signals, including from the Kiev regime, that they are ready to have some kind of dialogue. The only thing I want to say is that we have always said this as well. We are ready and want to resolve this conflict by peaceful means, based on the principles that I outlined in June of last year at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, and with participation in addressing the root causes that led to this crisis. The ball is entirely in the court of the leader of the Kyiv regime and their European sponsors. Then Vladimir Putin threatened Europe with consequences if they confiscate frozen Russian assets, stated that war with Europe is already quite real, and a couple of days ago said that this is nonsense. And as for NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, he insulted him by saying that he supposedly doesn't hear the statements of the bald ghoul Vladimir Putin that Russia allegedly no longer intends to attack Europe. Putin's bipolar behavior is clear, and it's amusing how he suddenly recalls international law. When it comes to frozen Russian assets, Putin said that if the European Union goes ahead with the seizure of Russia's frozen assets, Moscow will defend its interests in court. Quote, theft is the secret taking of property, but here they're trying to do it openly. This is robbery. This is robbery. But why can't they pull off this robbery? Because the consequences could be severe for the robbers. We will defend our interests first and foremost in court. We will try to find a residence that is independent of political decisions. Unfortunately, Donald Trump, the American president, has given Putin free rein. The fact is that on December 12, the Central Bank of the Russian Federation filed a lawsuit against the Belgian depository Euroclear in the Arbitration Court of Moscow for the amount of 19 trillion rubles. And now the Central Bank of the Russian Federation also intends to recover losses caused by the blocking and use of its assets in Europe. But what really made me laugh during this leave Q&A was that Vladimir Putin stated that the Russian economy is indeed collapsing, just at a tremendous pace. But on the other hand, he says Russians can be proud of capturing Ukrainian cities. According to Vladimir Putin, this year, Russia's gross domestic product will grow by less than 1%, which is 4 times less than the previous year. Vladimir Putin says this was always the plan. Quote, "A deliberate, conscious step, a price to pay for preserving the quality of the economy. But on the front line, the Russian army is advancing along the entire line of contact and the enemy is retreating under Russian control. Several weeks ago, the city of Kupensk was taken, where 15 battalions of the armed forces of Ukraine, totaling 15,000 people, were surrounded, and the city of Volchansk also came under control." And finally, Putin gave, some advice to Russian mothers. As Putin stated, Russian citizens should take an example from the republics of the Caucasus, where marriages are entered into at a young age. According to him, this will increase the birth rate and provide more cannon fodder in the future. For war. And please forgive me, but at the end of the episode I will give you Putin's quote verbatim. In the Caucasus, there is a very good tradition. They marry off their sons and daughters at a fairly early age. I spoke with Kadyrov. He has a large family and we should follow their example. The birth rate needs to be increased to 2. Right now in Russia, it has dropped to 1.4. Continuing the family line is a divine mission for a person, and it should be fulfilled thinking about the soul, not about money. You can wait endlessly for material conditions to improve, for a better situation, for education and so on, but it's better not to postpone it. The birth of a child is a part of our life, and we must go through this life since there is already an end. Putin says, have more children. Here are his admonitions. Friends, please write your opinion about Vladimir Putin's direct line in the comments. Many of you have likely seen, heard or read much on Telegram channels and formed your own opinion about the Russian dictator's latest statements. So please write your opinion in the comments under this episode. Yes, the news is really alarming, and I understand that for many people, their minds are just overheating from such a flow of information. We are living in a state of chronic stress, and it's normal to get tired of it. By the way, if you feel like you're already at your limit, like your battery is drained and nothing brings you joy, I have some recommendations for you. This is Bobby Rapsay's YouTube channel, where a skilled psychologist explains complex psychological processes using simple language and news examples, helping us understand ourselves. By the way, he recently released an excellent episode about why we feel tired even without work and how to deal with it. The link to Bobby Rapsay's YouTube channel is in the description of this video. Be sure to check it out, make sure to subscribe, and watch the latest episodes. They're really helpful and truly make a difference. You know, to get your head straight. Well, let's continue, friends. If you found this episode helpful, I ask you to support this YouTube channel financially with any donation or paid subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles.